before we dive in a little deeper, I mean, I just want to gauge your excitement for this fight, because when I think about some of the best fights you can make in the UFC right now, I mean, lightweight's a super deep division, but these guys specifically, stylistically, with the first fight that they fought back in 2019, I mean, there are so many narratives going into this one.
So the first meeting between Islam Makhachev and Arman Tsarukyan, as some of our viewership may know, April 20th, 2019. Still to this point, only UFC show in Russia. It was in St. Petersburg. Arman Tsarukyan was stepping up on short notice for his UFC debut against the guy we now know as the future standard at 155 pounds, Islam Makhachev. And it seemed at times in that fight that maybe the Makhachev camp, certainly they do their homework, but they didn't quite understand all that was the athlete that was on the other side, just in terms of what he could do in some of those wrestling and grappling transitions. But my gosh, man, when I go back and watch that footage from 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I guess almost, they look like babies to me. And especially when it comes to the overall physicality and strength of both men. They look like welterweights to me now. They look closer to featherweights back then. I can't wait. And you're right. Stylistically, for those who know, they know that this main event, at least on paper, you never know how it'll play out. It's about as good as it gets.
Yeah, besides the physicality, when you watch that first fight, I mean, what type of improvements do you feel like Islam has made since then?
Where do we begin? How much time do you have? I mean, certainly in terms of his striking, I think he just has more layers to his overall striking game. His jab has consistently gotten better with every passing training camp, but there's so many different nuances to his overall game when it comes to the takedowns and the wrestling. And even if you look back at his last performance, if you're only as good as your last fight, right? The nuanced, sophisticated nature of the takedown he got against a very credentialed opponent, Dustin Poirier, and then getting the submission. And, you know, part of what we're going to talk about today, Arman Tsarukyan was threatening with submissions in that first fight. He hasn't submitted a guy yet in the UFC, and I don't know that Islam Makhachev is necessarily going to be the first. So Islam's just got a lot of different ways to beat you. You know, it's crazy to think that Arman Tsarukyan would be plus 310 or higher against any opponent at 155 pounds, but it speaks to the present greatness of the pound-for-pound king and the lightweight champ.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you a little bit about that. He opened, I believe Islam opened at like minus 275. That line has taken a run all the way to minus 400. I mean, is there something about Islam's aura? I mean, he has obviously proven himself. I want to say, though, in that Dustin fight, even the first Volkanovski fight, he, you know, showed that he is a little bit human. He could get beat up. He could get in these grisly exchanges. He could maybe lose a round or two. But the people love him in this fight. I mean, what do you think gives the people so much faith that Islam can defend the belt again?
Well, I think consistency is really what lies at the core of everything that he has done. Now, unlike Khabib Nurmagomedov, there was an early setback for Islam Makhachev, getting knocked out by Adriano Martins in his second UFC fight. So as he chases Khabib-type lightweight greatness, you know, perhaps that is always going to be something that he has to distance himself from. But it's the manner in which he wins. Just that if he had to beat you in a kickboxing match, he's got a great chance to beat you there. If he had to beat you in a straight wrestling match, not a lot of guys going to beat him at 155 pounds. And certainly we've talked a lot about the grappling. So he is a true five-tool player. I think he is in his fighting prime. Perhaps Arman Tsarukyan is slowly getting towards his fighting prime, but not there yet. Perhaps that's reflective in the price. But Islam Makhachev consistently, for me, has been the best pound-for-pound fighter in the world, really since he assume the throne in 2022. Yes, you're right. He has been tested at times and has shown some mortality. And perhaps at times, even though he already has as many title defenses as Khabib Nurmagomedov, he has shown some more mortality, and that there have been more compromising moments along the way. But this dude's the man. And, you know, far be it from me or any talking head to sit here and suggest that he doesn't deserve, you know, some minus 400 distinction.
Islam is also, and this has been talked about a lot, really close to tying Anderson Silva's consecutive win record. Kamaru Usman, you know, came really, really close, and Dana White talked about how difficult that mark really is when he, of course, got knocked out by Leon Edwards in Salt Lake City. I know you just touched on a little bit with comparisons to guys like Khabib and maybe even BJ Penn or Benson Henderson, who had those 3 title defenses, but can you contextualize Islam's legacy in the grand scheme of UFC lightweights? Because, you know, a few more wins and he's looking like potentially the best lightweight of all time.
Well, these are difficult conversations, and I know some people like when we lean into them and like when we engage in them, and others do not, right? What I have said repeatedly is that the best mixed martial arts fighters of all time are the ones who are competing right now. So some people would say Fedor Emelianenko is a better Russian fighter than Petr Yan. Well, I don't necessarily agree with that sentiment. So what do you need to do to really distance yourself as an all-time great, to sort of be on that Mount Rushmore? At 155 pounds, to me, it's the division in which it makes it the hardest to sort of carve out that type of space. Because for me, 1 through 30 or 35 in the UFC, this is the deepest division. And I have felt that way for a long time. You're hearkening back to the days of Benson Henderson and BJ Penn. And who is the greatest lightweight of all time? For me, a prime BJ Penn is that guy. But you don't have an Anderson Silva, a long reigning champion like a John Jones, who had myriad title defenses that sort of is the jumping off point for the greatest of all time conversation. So at 55, would Islam Makhachev with a 4th title defense over a very credentialed Arman Tsarukyan in the eyes of some become the greatest lightweight of all time? Sure. I'm a modern era guy, but I'm not necessarily one, especially in my position, who likes to sort of lean too heavily into one guy versus another, right? But right now, if you're asking me who's the greatest lightweight of all time, it's the prodigy, BJ Penn.
Gotcha. From Arman Tsarukyan's side, however, that loss, he stepped up on short notice, maybe felt like he didn't get a fair shake to challenge somebody as talented as Islam Makhachev. John, do you feel like there's maybe some added vitriol? I know, as always, you'll know more in the fighter meetings, but from your perspective, does this feel like not only an important title defense for Islam, but a bit of a grudge match on Arman's side?
I think there's something to that, but it's 2 power camps. These are 2 of the most well-coached fighters in the game. I would say probably 2 of the most coachable guys in the game. And I don't know that familiarity has really breeded any contempt. Certainly Umar Nurmagomedov and Merab Dvalishvili, who we will get to, stole the show at the UFC 311 pre-fight press conference. But rematches give you this underbelly. They give you this backdrop. And yeah, I mean, if you're on the Islam Makhachev side, are you sick of hearing how close a 30-27 fight was? And if you're Arman Tsarukyan, who did win, he did win 1 round on one of the 3 judges' scorecards. There was a 29-28 in there. I'm sure you can't wait to present what is a much better version of yourself with a full training camp. And we got 25 minutes to decide it. And we didn't get finality in terms of a finish the first time they met. So I can't wait. I would also submit to you that when you watch these guys live, it's a little bit different. And I have called the majority of Islam Makhachev's UFC fights. I have been there, I think, for 2 of Arman Tsarukyan's 11 UFC fights, maybe 3. So he hasn't been on a lot of big pay-per-view stages. And I think he's the type of athlete Arman Tsarukyan is. And we saw it at UFC 300 that rises to the occasion. So I cannot wait to see it. And supposedly this venue is absolutely insane. So we're excited.